Hi, this is Dr. Justin Marchegiani here, and today we'll be going over the gluten-free live part 2. Again, you aren't fully gluten-free unless you're grain-free. In summary of part 1, essentially prolamines are different types of glutens, and as you see by looking at part 1, you're going to have prolamines throughout all grains. Some higher concentrations, such as corn, obviously your wheat, barley, and rye, which are your typical conventional gluten-free grains, but also sorghum and also millet. And you can see the prolamines that are the lowest are going to be in rice. So if you really want to be true gluten-free, you really have to cut the grains out and see how your immune system and your body do. So this is a really interesting study. This study looked at patients who were celiac, who were on a gluten-free diet for almost 2 years and weren't getting better and weren't healing. And it's really important to note that for every 1 out of 8 people that have, your typical gastrointestinal symptoms such as diarrhea, bloating, or gas, or stomach pain, 7 out of 8 are actually going to have symptoms that are not gastrointestinally associated, meaning they're going to just have brain fog, or they're going to have headaches and migraines and joint pain and fatigue. So again, it's really tough because if you're one of these patients that isn't recovering on a gluten-free diet and doesn't have those typical gluten symptoms of the gut, you're going to fall through the cracks and you're never really going to associate the diet with it because you never got better on a gluten-free diet and you don't have those typical symptoms, so you never bother even doing the more sensitive testing. So again, this study was really looking at gluten contamination. So they put patients who were gluten-free for 2 years who weren't healing on a gluten-contaminated elimination diet. They cut out a lot of the grains we're talking about. So it's really cool that we have research on this. And what they found is that a gluten-contaminated elimination diet may be an effective therapeutic approach for a gluten-free diet adherent patients. So patients that aren't getting better on this gluten-free diet, they may do better on a gluten contamination elimination diet. So again, they were allowed these foods over here, and you can see what they weren't allowed were a lot of the other grains that are actually considered gluten-free. They even cut out some of the other lunch meats and other junk food that may have trace amounts of gluten in there, and they also took out a whole bunch of other dairy products. And again, what you can see, what they were allowed, the only grain was white and brown rice. And if you remember from part 1, rice had the lowest amount of glutens or prolamines in it. So that's a good thing. I hypothesized they would have done even better if they cut out the white rice and if they were to cut out the beans as well. But it's a really good start. So what the study actually showed is 14 out of the 17 patients actually improved. So you can see before and after, most of them saw a significant serological improvement in regards to their gut and their inflammation and antibodies, and only 3. So you have 1 right here, you have 2 right here, and you have 3 right here. So it's really interesting to note the improvement, and I surmise if we did a little bit deeper, if we looked at gut infections, if we looked at going true gluten-free and looked at other types of infections, we probably would have been able to have full resolution. This is a great study looking at cross-reaction, meaning there are other proteins other than your typical gliadin, which is what we consider gluten, correct? The other proteins that we may eat, whether it be from milk or other types of grains, actually react, and our immune system will react to it just like we're eating gluten. So what this study showed that if you are gluten sensitive, you're actually going to benefit by cutting out these other foods as well because your body will react to them as well. So it says these should then be treated as gluten-like peptides and should also be excluded from the diet when the gluten-free diet seems to fail. So let's take a look at this here. We have our gliadin, which we typically consider our gluten, our conventional form of gluten. We know gluten's in all grains, though. We have our control. So we know the immune system is responding here. It's not responding there as much. And we can see casein, we see milk, we see brewer's yeast, we see millet, we see corn, we see rice. Other grains are typically the biggest ones in their response. So really the key thing is if you're going to go gluten-free, also go off of the main cross-reactive proteins, which are going to be the grains and also the dairy. So really interesting, when you break down wheat, you find your proteins, which we have gluten, which then gets broken down to gliadin. That's kind of our typical, this is the only bad thing about wheat, right? That's what we think. And when we test for gluten issues on the mainstream medicine, we're only looking at this alpha epitope. So we have alpha, beta, gamma, and omega epitopes. And typically we have different enzymes that our body can create antibodies to based off of these epitopes. So if our body makes transglutaminase 1, that may cause vitiligo or dermatitis herpetiformis or psoriasis or eczema. If we make transglutaminase 2, that may cause our conventional celiac, where transglutaminase wears away the microvilli in the small intestine. Or we can make transglutaminase 6, which may affect the brain and create different balance problems or predispose us to Alzheimer's, dementia, or neurological conditions. So we have other issues that can stem from eating gluten. And again, a lot of times we're not even testing these glutens. So these are the ones that slip through the cracks in conventional testing. Again, there's a gluteomorphine-like component in gluten. So again, morphine's a compound that fits in the opioid receptor of the brain. Same receptor as Vicodin and heroin. So when we eat these proteins, it's hard to get off it. And the people that typically need to get off it the most are the ones that are the most resistant to it, which is kind of sad. And again, we have the glutenin component, which is also very, very irritating. So when we come off these proteins, we also eliminate the glutenin, and we also eliminate lectins such as wheat germ agglutinin. So these are really important because when we add in the wheat germ agglutinin and the glutenin and the different gluteomorphines and the other types of gliadin, we create an inflammatory molecule that's just really hard to get out of our system. And you can see when we combine them together, we have the perfect storm down here below. So again, let's look at some conventional testing. We already talked about some of the other things in regards to the cross-reactivity. We already talked about the different epitopes that aren't really tested when we look at gluten. And let's kind of look at what mainstream medicine does. Well, mainstream medicine, if you go to an allergist, typically is going to think, all right, let's look at an IgE test for wheat or rice or barley. They're going to run the IgE test, which are going to be your anaphylactic allergy, the ones you need an EpiPen for in case your throat swells up. And a lot of times that's going to be negative because we're not reacting immune system-wise in that type of way. But again, what we see is this is what they're testing, and our typical gastroenterologist may run some IgG testing, may run gluten or gliadin IgG, and they may run the transglutaminase and the endomysial antibodies too, but those might also show up positive, or negative. But again, most of the time they're going to be negative, so we have to do more sensitive testing. And again, we can look at IgA, we can look at IgM for gluten, we can look at the cross-reactive proteins, and we can even do genetic testing, such as HLA-DQ2, 8, B1, B2. These are other types of proteins that we can look at, other types of genes we can look at, and other types of our immune system to look at to see if our body's reacting. These tend to be a little bit more sensitive. But again, in the end, what we're seeing is the underlying denominator. We're seeing stress, right? And stress comes in physical, chemical, and emotional forms. Stress is going to break down our mucosal membrane barrier system. So things such as IgA that helps protect our gut lining is going to break down. And we're going to see food allergens. We're going to start being allergic to more foods because more foods slip into our bloodstream. We're also going to start seeing infections and toxicity because our immune system's now weakened because our barrier's down. We're going to start seeing malabsorption issues, a weakened immune system, and this is the vicious cycle for chronically ill people, for people with hormonal issues, digestive issues, fatigue, weight gain. This is the vicious cycle. And what the research is showing is that gliadin and other types of things can actually create or increase this compound called zonulin, which makes our gut more permeable. So essentially, they're finding in the celiac patients higher amounts of zonulin. They're finding barrier breaks down when we eat gluten. So we're making more of a leaky gut. So the gut's becoming more leaky, allowing more food particles undigested into the immune system, which is just causing our immune system to react to things like food that aren't really pathological. They aren't really out to get us. And if our immune system's constantly attacking, it's eventually going to get weakened. So again, what the Annals of the New York Academy of Science and Medicine are talking about, they're finding that these tight junctions are creating intestinal permeability, and that really autoimmunity and this intestinal permeability are really connected together. And what we're finding is we have this leaky gut here from the inflammation due to different foods, different cross-reactive proteins, infections. This creates the leaky gut. This creates the food intolerance. This creates the immune imbalances and creates the autoimmune condition. And again, not just leaky guts and other types of food allergens, we also see this bacterial overgrowth occur. So we have all kinds of bad bacteria. This could include parasites, even different viruses such as the Epstein-Barr virus or Coxsackie virus. These are different infections that can create more inflammation in the gut. And a lot of times patients that don't heal from that gluten-free diet or even a true gluten-free diet, a lot of them have infections that need to be addressed first. So if you aren't improving, even by making these changes, you need to look a little bit deeper. So again, we have our leaky gut here. This is the vicious cycle that occurs. That's then taking our tight junctions, which are here. These are healthy tight junctions, and it's taking them and breaking them down into unhealthy ones. So you can see healthy, unhealthy. So you can see the wear and tear that's occurring there. And then what happens with this leaky gut, we're also seeing a leaky brain. So the inflammation is causing different leakages in the blood-brain barrier, so the inflammation is seeping into the brain, creating more inflammation. It's turning on these microglial cells in the brain that essentially are immune cells in the brain, and it increases them so they start attacking more and more and more and creating more neuron death because they are designed to help with inflammation. And once they get turned on, it's really hard to turn them off. So again, appreciate everyone watching this video. For any questions, feel free and visit justinhealth.com. If you want to schedule a free consultation there, you can. The link will be below. And again, if you're having a hard time addressing some of these issues and you're not getting better, you have to dig a little bit deeper. Feel free and reach out and we can point you in the right direction. I hope you enjoyed this video. Have a great day.